On the evening of April 25th, 1971, an unknown serial killer began their 16-month window of relentless murders. 6 young African American girls fell victim, all within a small area near Washington, D.C. To this day, the person known as the Freeway Phantom has yet to be caught. The question is, will it ever happen, or has the passage of time erased all chances of it ever being discovered? Welcome to the world of the Arcane. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Arcane Archives podcast. My name is Cody, and a very big thank you to all of you tuning in today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to the episode, and if you are new here, welcome to the world of the Arcane. I have quite the episode for you today, a lot of mystery, and frankly, one of those unsolved cases that happen to slip through everyone's fingers. If you do enjoy, please rate the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to, and make sure to comment, if you can, any future topics you would like for me to talk about. Now, I quickly do want to apologize. It has been a couple of weeks since I have uploaded my last episode. I'm not going to get into all the boring details, but these past couple of weeks were the busiest couple of weeks that I've had in a long time. Everything's been taken care of. No need to worry about that. We are going forward with some great momentum. We got some great future episodes coming out, so stay tuned for those. But for this week, let's focus on the Freeway Phantom. So let's travel back in time to April 25th, 1971, to our first of 6 victims. Our first victim's name was Carol Denise Spinks. Carol, along with all the other victims, lived in or around Washington, D.C. Carol had a twin sister and was told by their mother to stay home while she went out of the house. They both knew that she was very strict with her discipline, so neither of them had the intention on leaving the house that night. Her older sister, who was 24 and happened to live across the hallway from them, eventually, after some talking, convinced her that she should go grab some groceries for her. After she agreed to go, she went to the local 7-Eleven that was just down the road. Coincidentally, she actually ran into her mom, who happened to be traveling home. She talked to Carol and she allowed her to continue with her shopping, but told her that she would be punished when she came home. After she had picked up the requested items from her sister, she started making her way back to the house. Sometime between the 7-Eleven store and that very short walk back to her apartment, Carol was kidnapped without a single piece of evidence to point to who did it or what exactly happened. Naturally, with Carol not returning, her mother grew concerned and eventually called for a missing persons report that actually never materialized for whatever reason. Eventually, she gathered a local search party with some of her friends and family members, and even with all of this effort being put in, Carol Spinks' body was not found until about a week later. 6 days to be precise, she was found behind the building of St. Elizabeth's Hospital by an 11-year-old boy who had been playing with a couple of other kids in a grassy area. The police, of course, were called. An autopsy was eventually performed, and this is what they found. She had cuts all over her body, and from what the autopsy says, there was clear evidence of rape and sodomy. She had been kept alive for a couple of days after being abducted, and had only been killed about 2 to 3 days before being discovered. After all of these different signs, the official cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Now, a little snippet of info before we continue with this case is that her body was found less than a mile from her abduction, and the hospital next to them housed plenty of mentally unwell individuals. Just a little thing to keep in mind. Our second victim's name is Darlenia Denise Johnson, a 16-year-old girl from Congress Heights, who also lived in the same neighborhood as Carol. On July 8, 1971, Darlenia left home, telling her mother that she would be staying overnight at the nearby rec center for a local sleepover event. Near this rec center was her job that she routinely walked to and was not really that far away. It was something that she had walked many times, so nothing seemed out of place there. As expected, Darlenia never arrived to work that day, and her absence was noticed the day after, and a missing persons report was filed, labeling her case as an official abduction. Witnesses reported seeing her and her boyfriend that afternoon, but his mother refused to let the police speak to him. Another witness claimed to have seen Darlenia with an older African American man in an older black car, but no specific details were available. These leads turned out to be complete dead ends. Rumors did circulate about Darlenia's mother receiving taunting phone calls, with her caller claiming, "I killed your daughter." Police seemed uninterested in the case, as noted by their inaction. In mid-July of 1971, an employee of the DC Department of Highways and Traffic discovered a body near I-295, close to where Carol Spinks' body had been found. Despite multiple calls reporting the body, police were extremely slow to respond. It took days for any action to be taken even after the body had been found. Eventually, a police sergeant named Charles Baden was personally called and asked to deal with it, and the body that had been lying there for a week was identified as Darlenia Denise Johnson. Darlenia and Carol were found 15 feet from the other victim at 2 separate times. I just gotta add here, the inaction or the lack of, I guess you could just say, motivation of the police officers in these cases are so, I don't even know. If I got a call as a police officer saying, "Hey, I found a body," would you not just immediately go to the crime scene? These people took days to do anything. Now, there's speculation on why that is. We're not really going to get into that right now, but just keep in mind that the action on the police's parts were very, it was poorly done. Just keep that in mind as we keep going forward. The case showed similarities to Carol Spinks' murder. Both bodies were found close to each other. Both victims were found in their clothes, but without shoes, and both had been missing for some time. Due to decomposition, Darlenia's body required fingerprinting for identification, and an autopsy revealed evidence of strangulation, though other details were inconclusive. It is also here where we start to, as I mentioned, see the lack of initiative from police officers. There were leads that weren't taken seriously, phone calls that were brushed off, and just overall unprofessionalism. As I mentioned, they were very sluggish in the action that they took. Now, you can say that it is prejudice against the victims and their families. It was the early 70s, and all the victims were African American girls. I don't want to label the entire police force as discriminative against these groups of people, but keep in mind the time. Keep in mind that there were other cases similar to these ones that involved other people, and they were more diligent on those ones, but these specific 6, they seem to be lacking motivation. There's a lot of ifs, and there's not a lot of concrete proof of anything, but again, as I mentioned, keep that in mind. Who knows? Moving forward from that, Brenda Faye Crockett is our next victim. She was a 10-year-old girl living near Cardoza High School in Northwest. On the evening of July 27th, 1971, around 8 p.m., while other kids were settling in for a movie night, Brenda was sent by her mother to a nearby store to buy bread and dog food. There is no evidence she even reached the store, and when she didn't return, her family began searching the neighborhood. While her family was out looking, Brenda's 7-year-old sister Bertha answered a phone call at the house. It was Brenda, crying and distracted, saying, "A white man picked me up, and I'm heading home in a cab." Before the call ended, she did mention that she was in Virginia for whatever reason. Around 10 p.m., another phone call came in. This time, Brenda's mother's boyfriend answered. Brenda repeated that a white man had picked her up and she was coming home in a cab. When asked if she was in Virginia, Brenda asked, "Did my mother see me?" The conversation was confused and ended with Brenda saying, "Well, I'll see you," before the line went dead. About 8 hours after Brenda's disappearance, early on July 28th, a hitchhiker found her body on US Route 50 near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway in Prince George's County, Maryland. She had been strangled with a scarf still knotted around her neck, and her body appeared washed. Oddly, her feet were clean despite her having left home without shoes. The quick discovery of Brenda's body, compared to Carol and Darlenia, suggested the killer felt urgency, possibly due to the proximity to Brenda's neighborhood. Investigators believe the killer might have been someone local, trying to dispose of the body quickly. From the research, I didn't seem to find anything in regards to sexual assault before she was killed, which I guess is slightly, this is a sad thing to say, slightly better than how the past victims were treated. Still, of course, horrible what happened to her, but, it wasn't as bad as the other ones. 2 months later, Nino Moshia Yates, also known as Nino, was walking home October 1st, 1971, from a nearby Safeway store. This specific store was less than a block away from her house. So this was a very confined area. I'm just going to say that again. A block away. Tiny. We're not talking about far down the road. This was really, really close to her house. This 12-year-old girl was abducted sometime around 7 p.m., and her body was found 3 hours later by a hitchhiker. And just like the previous victims, she did not have her shoes on her, and there were mysterious fibers on her body. The autopsy says she was strangled to death and her esophagus had been broken, which points to extreme force well beyond what is necessary to suffocate someone. Police did note of a supposed blue Volkswagen that someone claimed that she had gotten into, but that led ultimately to nowhere. That was a dead end. After the death of Nino, the official name, the Freeway Phantom, started to get used. A month after Nino, the body of Brenda Denise Woodard was found by a police officer on November 16, 1971. Her body had been stabbed numerous times and strangled. Her body was found near a bus station that her mother went to regularly, and in a gruesome draw of luck, her mother actually happened to hear the commotion of her body being found and went out to that specific station. That is when she learned about her death, and I mean, that is an awful way to learn about that, truly. Initially, officers were skeptical to connect Brenda's death with that of the Freeway Phantom. This case had three major differences, or things that separated her death from associating it with the Freeway Phantom. The first one is that she had been stabbed while the other victims were strangled. She was also strangled as well, but stabbing is not an insignificant addition to how she died. It's big enough to draw more questions about the case. The second one is that she had her shoes on when she was found. This is very, very different than the other girls because she is the only one that had shoes on when she was discovered. Third one is that she was 18 years old when all of the other girls were still legally considered children. This could have been a mistake by the killer because they may have thought she was younger than 18. I assume that the killer would have some knowledge about their victims and they would have known that she was 18. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe it was just crime of opportunity. That one's a little less important in regards to the case, but it is something that was noted as being different than the other cases. Now, with those differences listed, there was a very, very glaring piece of evidence that convinced authorities that she was a victim of the Freeway Phantom. In her pocket was a note from the Freeway Phantom, and this is what it said. "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can. Freeway Phantom." Experts concluded that Brenda had written the note, most likely dictated to her by her killer. Why the Freeway Phantom decided to finally write a letter, who knows? Maybe they decided to embrace the name since they were officially given the name Freeway Phantom. Maybe they wanted more notoriety. A lot of questions. And obviously, not a lot of answers. So let's fast forward almost an entire year, and the final victim of the Freeway Phantom is Diane Denise Williams. After visiting with her boyfriend the night of September 5th, 1972, she was last seen alive getting onto a bus. Hours later, her body was found by a trucker along I-295. She was found to have been strangled, but there were no signs of sexual assault. Her shoes were missing from her feet, but unlike the other victims, her shoes were placed right next to her. Take that how you may, but I see that as a statement from the killer saying, "I'm done." These shoes signify she is the last one. Of course, it's, total speculation, but you never know. I see it as some sort of statement, whatever that may be. Now, there were traces of semen on her clothes, but again, there were no signs of sexual assault. Her boyfriend, after being questioned, said that there was nothing sexual that happened the night before with them, and he was very adamant about that. The sample collected ended up starting a 30-plus year debacle in terms of trying to get results. Fast forward all the way to 2002, and it was submitted for testing, but since there had been supposed backlogs and difficulties getting it tested, there are many people that speculate that they either lost the evidence and are too ashamed to admit it, or they truly are that backlogged, which I'm leaning more towards the first one. It's been a hot minute, and there's no way that they're that backlogged. But, it's the government, so that kind of speaks for itself. I'll just say that. There are speculations that it is to hide the identity of the killer. There is a small theory and a personal theory of mine that we'll get into later about that. But in recording this episode, there's still no answer. So that's a manufactured dead end, kind of a weird way to put it, but there's no answer, so you just gotta leave it at that. Now, with 6 girls confirmed to be the victims of the Freeway Phantom, police were well into finding potential suspects. We know that the killer targeted African American girls between the ages of 10 and 18 and strangled them the majority of the time. They did not have shoes on them when found, and they were found near main roads and freeways. One of the biggest suspects was a group called the Green Vega Rapists, a group of people that would drive around DC and do as their name suggests. They are believed to be responsible for around 100 sexual assaults in that area. These men used a green Chevy Vega to abduct and rape young women, earning them their nickname. At the time, the Freeway Phantom crime spree had ended, and all known members of the gang were incarcerated in Virginia Lorton Prison on charges, of course, related to sexual violence. There was an anonymous tip received sometime after the Freeway Phantom, suggesting a possible connection between the Green Vega gang and the unsolved spree. A known acquaintance of the gang, who was not incarcerated at the time, was interviewed by police. He identified 3 of the murder victims from a photo lineup, which, of course, suggests a connection with the investigation. Investigators then focused on Lorton Prison, interviewing individual gang members. Morris Joseph Warren agreed to speak to investigators under the condition his name be kept confidential. After that, he began providing information about the Freeway Phantom crimes, claiming a gang member's involvement and offering details about specific dates, times, and locations. Warren's information included new information not reported in the media, which lent credibility to his claims. He was taken to specific locations where he pointed out sites of abductions, assaults, murders, and body disposals. His guidance seemed accurate, leading investigators to take his word seriously. However, Warren had alibis for several crime dates, suggesting he obtained his information from another source, likely an inmate implicated in the murders. Despite its promise, this lead unraveled when PG County State Attorney Arthur A. Marshall leaked details to the press, claiming progress on the Freeway Phantom case for his re-election campaign. Warren, after hearing this news on the radio, immediately stopped helping. Some investigators remained convinced on the Green Vegas gang's involvement in the Freeway Phantom murders, believing them until their deaths. However, other detectives examining the case later noted that most of Warren's information was likely derived from media reports, doubting the gang's role in the serial murders. This case still lingers with uncertainty over the Green Vega rapist's potential involvement. Another suspect is Robert Askins. Askins was a former computer technician and patient at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which had a violence and sexual assault. In 1978, he was arrested and charged with abducting and raping a woman, which led investigators to re-examine his past. Askins had previously been convicted of murder in 1938 for poisoning a woman, although his conviction was later overturned on appeal. He was also suspected in several other violent crimes, further raising investigators' suspicions. During the Freeway Phantom investigations, police found handwritten notes in his possession that bore similarities to notes found on the bodies of the Freeway Phantom's victims. Despite these links and the circumstantial evidence suggesting his involvement, Askins was never formally charged with the Freeway Phantom murders. He maintained his innocence until his death in 2010. The case remains unsolved, with Askins being one of the several suspects considered by investigators. Now, there are plenty of more suspects and theories floating out there. Way too many for me to talk about in one episode. But, as we knew from the very beginning, there sadly is no resolution to this case. We still might have that semen sample I mentioned earlier, but having been around 50 years after these deaths, if nothing has happened yet, the chances of anything happening get smaller with each passing day. With each episode, I like to share my own thoughts, and to be honest, I really don't have much to add. If I were to narrow down who did it, I personally would think that it would be someone of authority, specifically a police officer. I say that because someone with authority would be able to stop anyone on the street, no matter what time it is, no matter how close they are to their home. I really don't have any evidence besides that, but they're like some of these cases, as I mentioned, they lived a block away from where they were abducted, versus they had to get on a bus and drive home. No matter how far away they were or how close, if a police officer stopped them, they would stop. So that's honestly all I have. So other than that, and if there's no other information that arises in the future, these cases will sadly remain cold, and it's such a tragedy that they have to. But with that being said, that has been the Freeway Phantom Murders. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Once again, just quickly, I do apologize for the last month and the crazy schedule. Again, that's all been taken care of. You can expect weekly episodes again. Make sure to comment future topics if you can. Rate the podcast if you would like. Thank you again for taking time out of your day to listen. I will see you all next week.